Hey friends, it's Dimitri with Rubashka Streetwear. Today I want to talk about why execution matters. And I know that sounds kind of weird. It's not someone on death row or anything like that. Basically, when you are starting your brand and business, or let's say that you are developing a product, you have an idea, right? But that idea is composed of two large concepts. It's composed of the product, or maybe you are in a service kind of related business. But then there's kind of it's almost hidden in a way, and maybe you won't think about it right when you are thinking of an idea, and that is the execution of it. And execution obviously just means the way you follow through with your idea, the way you develop it out. And this is so important. You might have a really great idea, but if you don't execute on it well, it doesn't matter essentially. You're just going to be, throwing it to the wind, and it's going to go wherever, and nothing's going to happen from it, right? And there's a lot of components that have to do with execution. The first one, and I'm just going to list a ton of them, is the design of it. Is your product designed well? Does it follow design language, and does it have design elements that make sense? And this can go on really long here too. This could be stuff like colors, shapes, typography, like artwork in there. All sorts of stuff can be woven into the design aspect of it. You might have a cool, like, let's say you're going to put a phrase on a t-shirt, and it's a cool phrase and stuff, but you design it in a way that's kind of ugly and it doesn't really make sense to the phrase that you're trying to say. That's a method of poor execution, right? So maybe if you put it if you use better typography, like a better font for it, it would look cooler and the customer would actually like that. But instead you use something that doesn't make sense to the concept that you're trying to do, and now it's essentially a failed product. Another form of execution is actually the physical product itself, and this also interweaves with design concepts as well. So that could be like the material, and also the colors of the material, that kind of stuff in there. It could be the quality, the feel of the product, etc. Like all that kind of stuff has to go into it. The durability, longevity, all sorts of factors, and this can go on. Longevity, this can go on indefinitely. Let's say that you are creating a hat and you want it to be waterproof and you are trying to sell it. And that's kind of like a selling point for it. Like your audience is people that like to be outdoors, they like to go kayaking, hiking, and that's something that you're really trying to push. And you have kind of maybe a cool pattern or design for the hat. Now, let's say that you do that and then you put it on a dad hat and it doesn't really make sense for who you're trying to sell it for. Like maybe it would be a better idea to go with a bucket hat. But even at that point, what if you make that sort of bucket hat or a boonie hat and you make it with a material that's not waterproof, but you're trying to like appeal to that sort of market segment, right? That could be a way where you fail on the execution and you don't capture that market. You don't have a product that's really tailored and catering to those kinds of people, right? Another thing that you can do with execution that's super important is timing. I'll give you an example of this. So during the pandemic a few years ago, a lot of brands and businesses, they started selling masks, and people would, put their logo on it, they'd put an image on it, all sorts of stuff with that. Now, when you're in that position, you have kind of a narrow window of time. And this was a unique situation, but unique situations pop up from time to time. If you decided to order 10,000 masks, custom masks, towards the end of the pandemic, that is a horrible business decision, and that's horrible timing, and you won't capitalize on the market that wanted that kind of stuff, right? So you definitely got to think about your schedule and when you release stuff. Another really good example of this is, let's say that you are trying to reference an important historical event or an anniversary. Like, let's say it's the 50th anniversary of some event, and you're like, you have a really cool idea to make a t-shirt or something like that. Well, you really have to think about the timeline from creation of your idea to the product and manufacturing and release in order to meet that timeline. Let's say like it's January and you have an important event in October. Well, you really have to make sure that you're going to follow in line with that schedule and make sure that you will market that correctly and make it and go through iterations so that when it's almost that important anniversary, weeks before, you release the product and people can buy it and they can wear it for that. Another thing with timing, kind of with back to like the pandemic, another related one is people, and I'm not saying this is good or bad, but they capitalize on someone dying in a sense. So if an important figure dies, a lot of people make memorial t-shirts, and really you have to create that design and do that within like 24 hours to 48 hours. Like, if that is something that's important to you, you really, really got to make that quickly, because then it has to go into production and all that kind of stuff. Or you could do a pre-order, but I'm against that in many ways, depending on the situation. But for that, that's also a popular thing that people are into. Some people like to buy that kind of stuff, or they have a hero or an artist or something, and they like to memorialize them on t-shirts and other clothing. And that's a perfect example of timing. If you want to do something like that, you gotta get it out right away. That's like the fastest thing out of all of this that you gotta do. You wouldn't want to wait 3 months to release something, because I guess the hype for that kind of thing is way down and people aren't really into that anymore. So really, really think about that. There are situations, let's say you're printing stuff yourself. Let's say that you have a really great printer that's local and they will like bust out work for you right away. That could be a situation that you could tap into to capitalize on some kind of market like that in a pinch. And then another big component of execution is essentially the way you market your products. So let's say that you got this down, all that's good. The design's good, the actual quality of the product is really good, but you really don't know how to market it, and you can't make, and marketing is essentially, promos, photography, so photos, videos. If you have a good product and there's no one to see it and you're not putting it in front of people's eyes, that's poor execution, and it's not going to go anywhere. You're not going to sell it. And essentially, in many ways, it's a failure, because you're just going to be left holding the bag. You're going to have all this inventory of, like, it's great stuff, but no one's there to see it. No one's there to appreciate it. And that's why this is also just super important with your method of execution. And this also, another kind of thing with the marketing, and it could be its own separate point, is the release. And the release is also very, very important with the timing, right? Let's say that the idea is great, you got the product down, it's good quality, but you really, really fumble on the release. You don't market it well. Your website has lots of bugs in it. People get blocked from trying to enter your website. You have passwords up. It doesn't look professional. That's probably going to end up with, dissatisfied customers. They're going to leave abandoned checkouts. They're not going to be really sure of whether or not you're a legitimate brand or business. And that's the, really, really important thing. You're trying to gain that trust. So to gain trust, I made a video about that, but also, with trust is you need to have some sort of professionalism on your business page, on your website, so they know that this is a brand that they can trust. It's not some shady website that's buggy now and they can't purchase something and you're asking for irrelevant information from them and creating this whole process. So then you're left with abandoned checkouts, unsold inventory. The brand is not really generating any good buzz. And making sure that you have an adequate release is basically like the final form of a good execution for your brand. So those are some of the main things with execution. You want to get the design really done. You have to kind of like know design language in a sense. And back to the design. Here's an example of stuff that has to do with execution. So here's a beanie. It has this little label on here. It looks really cool. People buy these, they like them. Now, I think this was executed pretty well, and it fits in accordance to a standard beanie, right? Now, if I took this label and I printed it on a large format poster, would that be a good idea? Would that be a good way to execute on this design and this concept that I'm trying to go for the label? Probably not. I don't think having a poster of this label, of this design, would be a good product to release. It doesn't make any sense, right? And you as a brand owner and as a designer, you kind of, for the most part, you intuitively know that kind of stuff. Like I wouldn't put that on a poster and I wouldn't market that and sell that because it's just not going to sell. But some people are, better at visualizing and seeing that concept than others. I'll give you another example. Here's a really popular hoodie that I released. It has an atomic testing, blast on here with the house exploding. So this worked really, really great for t-shirts and hoodies, but this sort of design would just not really work on like a dad hat right here. The reason why is because the material, like this stuff, wouldn't really print well on here. The image could only be so large. If you try to embroider this, a lot of detail would probably get lost in it. And overall, it just wouldn't make sense for this image to be on a hat. Now for the hat, here's an interesting design I made. So I did a parody of the USPS logo. There's other videos of this on my YouTube channel. This has been a really popular hat. And the design is very simple. So I was thinking, okay, it's very simple. I could either print or embroider it. I embroidered it because it looks cooler on a hat. And typically with hats, embroidery is a better method. It's a better form of execution rather than printing. It makes more sense. Now also, this sort of design translates very, very well on a t-shirt or a hoodie. So that's what I did, obviously. I made that. It also translated very well on a sticker, on a patch. There's some designs that look really, really great on multiple sort of platforms, I guess, in a way, like products, right? T-shirts, hats, hoodies, maybe a water bottle. And some, like this beanie label, obviously don't make any sense to put on anything other than a beanie. I have used this sort of label also for like I was working on a jacket, and it looks good on there. It can look good on other forms of clothing. Here's an example of a sticker, right? And this is a design I printed on lots of t-shirts. It works really great. I printed it on hoodies. This probably wouldn't look that great if I printed it on sweatpants on a leg. It doesn't really make sense. But what this would look great on, and I haven't done it yet, is it probably would look great on a poster, because you can have a large format poster and someone can hang this in their room, and I think they would like that, right? So you kind of have to know design language, and also you have to know some manufacturing processes with what you can get away with, what makes sense. And I think, like I said before, intuitively, you probably, can get 80% of the way there, and you will know what works and what doesn't for sorts of products. And that is obviously a form of execution that kind of merges the design and the actual products together. So yeah, in general, you have your idea and then you have the product and service, but then on the other hand, you have the execution of that. And if you get the execution down, then the product is going to fly off the shelves. If you don't get the execution down, you're going to be disappointed. You're going to be left holding the bag. I've seen this happen with many, many brands actually. So, funny quote, I think it's from Picasso, is he says, good artists copy, great artists steal. I've seen brands where, maybe other brands, they have kind of printed a design that's, kind of in the public domain, but they didn't really execute well on it and it kind of flopped, right? But then another brand comes in, they take that same design and they execute way, way, way better on the concept. And a lot of people are buying that, right? And inversely, this has even happened to me. I've made designs and they were executed very well. They all sold and all that kind of stuff. But I've seen other kind of copycat brands slash, I don't even know where these people are, but they just make fake copies of t-shirts. I guess that's sort of like a flattering thing in a way, because if people are making fakes and copies of your stuff, that means it's popular enough. But I've seen like those companies, they make copies of it, but they didn't execute well on it, and you could obviously tell it's like a bootleg of another brand. So that's obviously another way of like execution. They didn't execute on it well, and probably no one's gonna buy those fakes. They just don't look good. A funny example of this that I see in the stores, and maybe you guys have seen this. So Supreme, almost always when they print their logo, they print it in very specific ways. So they have their Supreme box, a logo tee and hoodie, and they print it in that very specific size. And when you see, like sometimes you're in the mall and you see people with bootleg Supreme tees and it's printed like this big, the box, and it just looks really off. That's obviously a form of poor execution. It doesn't look good. You could tell it's a bootleg, and Supreme does not have that kind of design language to make stuff like that. So I think it's kind of funny. And, the execution, you might not be able to take stuff to an A+. You're trying to get to that A+ level where you just execute on that concept really, really, really well. But maybe you have the way you execute it, it turns out to be a B-, right? But it still sells, people still like it. You let the design rest a little bit, you let it go out of stock, and then, you might go back to that design and you're like, you know what, I should have done it like this. I'm gonna tweak this, I'm gonna change this a little bit, I'm gonna use this color actually. And you take that B- and you make it into an A+, and you can re-release it as a version 2. I've done this many, many times. I've re-released older products after tweaking a couple things, and it makes the product look better. And then even after that point, a lot of more people buy it because it just looks a little bit better. So definitely you can do stuff like that. And I think it's also a great way to reintroduce products rather than just going with the old screens and the old designs. If there's little tweaks that you can make that make it better, definitely do that. If it's already an A+ and you don't need to do tweaks, don't do anything to it. Let it be and just go with it, right? Because it's already good. And, the final thing that I want to say about execution is that in order to make less mistakes on the execution and to succeed on it, you really, really got to go through iterations. Take your time. So this month I have some gear lined up. I have some hats coming out, but I really, really wanted to get this other design out, but I just couldn't finish it in time. I couldn't, do enough iterations, and I really wanted to take my time on this, and I stopped myself. I'm like, wait a second, I don't need to rush on this idea. The idea is really, really great. I've already fleshed out the design, but what I want to do now and what I'm working on right now is picking I'm using the design language. I'm picking the right colors. I'm going to pick the right method of manufacturing, whether that be embroidery, whether that be a patch, what kind of hat I'm going to use. So I'm thinking about all that kind of stuff right now. I'm ruminating on it. I'm not just jumping into it and like, okay, I'm going to send this off to the printer. The design is really cool. I've had positive feedback on it, but maybe if they make it a certain way, it's not going to look as good as if I made it this way, right? So I'm taking my time on that before I release those products with that design, right? Because I said I had a lot of positive feedback on the design, but I want to take my time and not rush into that. So when you are focusing on your idea and making your ideas come to life, don't jump into stuff too much and start doing it, right? Let's say that you finish a design, you're like, all right, this is great. I'm gonna send it off to the printers and they're gonna make 500 t-shirts of it. And then you kind of look at it, you sit on it, and it's being made, and then you're like, oh man, I should have made, I should have tweaked this little thing on the design. I should have made those lines a little bit thinner or thicker. I should have actually chose this color. It looks way cooler. It makes more sense for that. Oh, I can't. They're already making 500 t-shirts and it's going to be this way. And it's going to be a C plus or a B minus in terms of the design, right? It's not going to be an A plus. Go through many, many iterations. Think about how you're going to make it or print it or embroider it. Don't just make the design, even if you think it's good, and just shoot it to the stars and let it go and let it start being made. That's not a good idea. You want to take your time and kind of chew it over, ruminate on it, think about it, and that way you're going to execute way better on it. And that is going to be to your benefit. So anyways, I hope you guys liked this video. I hope you got some value out of it. If you have any other questions about how you can execute well in your designs, leave them down below and I'll try to get back to you guys. And I'll catch you guys later. Thanks.